You've always needed attention, Mom. Today is finally supposed to be about me, my daughter whispered before she picked up the electric razor and pressed it against the side of my head in the bridal suite 2 hours before her wedding. I didn't scream. I didn't pull away. I just sat there in the white leather chair while pieces of silver hair slid slowly down the front of the navy blue dress I had spent 3 weeks choosing for her special day. Someone behind me laughed softly. Another bridesmaid lifted her phone a little higher. The buzzing sound filled the room, low and steady, while Chloe smiled at herself in the mirror like she was fixing a minor inconvenience instead of humiliating her 68-year-old mother in front of half her wedding party. Hold still, she said lightly. You'll ruin the line. The room smelled like hairspray, perfume, and champagne. Sunlight poured through the tall hotel windows overlooking downtown Chicago, catching the floating strands of my hair as they drifted onto the marble floor. A few hours earlier, I had walked into that suite carrying coffee trays for everyone because Chloe said the catering staff was running behind schedule. I still remember balancing 4 paper cups in my hands while trying not to wrinkle my dress. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked sitting in front of the vanity with her blonde curls pinned halfway up, glowing with excitement. For one small moment, I thought maybe she needed her mother again. That feeling didn't last long. This will make the wedding photos way less awkward, Chloe had joked 20 minutes earlier while the bridesmaids laughed too loudly around her. At first, I thought she meant trimming a loose strand near my neck. Then one of the girls handed her the razor. Then another locked the suite door. I should have walked out then. I know that now. But when you spend your entire life trying to keep peace with someone you love, your instincts betray you. You learn how to ignore the first warning signs. You tell yourself maybe you misunderstood the tone. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they don't mean it the way it sounds. Mothers become experts at swallowing pain before anyone else notices it exists. Honestly, Mom, this is kind of iconic, Chloe said while angling the razor higher along my scalp. You'll thank me later. I stared at my own reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman sitting there. My lipstick looked too pale suddenly. My eyes looked tired. Thin patches of exposed skin appeared beside my ear where my hair used to be. One bridesmaid shifted uncomfortably near the counter, but she didn't stop Chloe either. None of them did. That hurt more than I expected. Not cruelty. Silence. Silence always hurts worse. Chloe, I said quietly, finally finding my voice. Why are you doing this? She sighed dramatically, like I was embarrassing her. Because every time there's an important moment in my life, somehow people still focus on you. Your health scares. Your emotional speeches. Your constant need to be the center of everything. I felt something cold settle deep inside my chest. Not anger. Not even heartbreak. Recognition. The kind that arrives late after years of excuses finally collapse under the weight of truth. You really believe that? I asked. Chloe looked directly at me through the mirror while lowering the razor into her lap. I know it. One of the bridesmaids muttered. Maybe we should stop, but Chloe ignored her. Mom, do you know how exhausting it is growing up with everyone treating you like some kind of saint just because you survived cancer? The room went completely still. Even the girls holding phones stopped moving. 20 years ago, chemotherapy had taken my hair in handfuls. Chloe was 14 then. She used to sit beside me in the bathroom while I cried quietly into towels so she wouldn't hear me. She once helped me tie silk scarves around my head before church because I was too ashamed to let people see me without hair. Back then, she used to kiss my forehead and tell me I still looked beautiful. I had spent years believing those memories meant something permanent. But people change slowly, then all at once. Chloe stood up from her chair and handed the razor to one of the bridesmaids before smoothing invisible wrinkles from her wedding robe. Relax, she said casually. It'll grow back. Then she walked toward the champagne table while laughter cautiously returned around the room, weaker this time, uncertain. I looked down at the silver strands covering my lap. My hands rested calmly against the fabric of my dress. Strangely, I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt awake. Fully awake for the first time in years. Across the room, someone's phone screen lit up with a social media notification. Another bridesmaid whispered something about uploading the clip later. Chloe lifted a champagne glass and smiled while sunlight flashed against the diamond bracelet I had given her that morning. To the best wedding ever, she announced. Everyone raised their glasses except me. I reached slowly for the silk scarf folded beside my purse and wrapped it carefully around my head, covering the uneven patches Chloe left behind. My fingers didn't shake. That surprised me most of all. Then I looked at my daughter standing in the middle of the bridal suite, laughing under crystal chandeliers while strangers filmed the aftermath of my humiliation, and I realized something terrifying. Shaving my head wasn't the cruelest thing Chloe had done to me that morning. The cruelest part was that she truly believed she was justified. The ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel looked exactly the way Chloe had always dreamed it would. Crystal chandeliers glowed above white rose centerpieces, so large they nearly blocked guests from seeing each other across the tables. Soft piano music drifted through the room, while waiters carried trays of champagne beneath gold lighting that made everything appear warmer than it really was. From a distance, it probably looked like the perfect wedding. That was the strange thing about appearances. They rarely told the truth. I stood alone outside the ballroom doors for almost 30 seconds before going in. My reflection stared back at me from the polished brass panels beside the entrance. The silk scarf covered most of the damage, but not all of it. One uneven patch near my temple still showed beneath the fabric. I adjusted the knot carefully, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my throat. A young hotel employee smiled politely while opening the doors for me. "You look lovely, ma'am," she said softly. I almost thanked her for lying. The noise inside dimmed the moment I walked in. Not completely, just enough to notice. Conversation slowed. Eyes lifted, then lowered again too quickly. I understood immediately what had happened. The video had already spread through the wedding party. Maybe not publicly yet, but enough people had seen it. Enough people knew. I could feel it in the silence that followed me across the ballroom floor. Some guests stared with pity. Others avoided looking at me altogether. A few glanced toward Chloe like they were waiting for instructions on how to react. I kept walking. Slow. Steady. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor while flashes from the photographer's camera bounced across the room. Near the sweetheart table, Chloe stood laughing beside Ryan while her makeup artist adjusted the train of her dress. She looked radiant. Untouchable. For a brief second, our eyes met across the ballroom. I expected discomfort. Shame, maybe. Instead, she smiled calmly and lifted her champagne glass toward me like we shared some private joke. Something inside me hardened then. Not anger. Anger burns hot and disappears quickly. This felt colder than that. Older somehow. Like the final cracks spreading through glass after years of pressure. Evelyn. I turned at the sound of my name and saw Martha Green weaving through the crowd toward me. We had been friends for more than 30 years, long enough for her to recognize when I was pretending to be stronger than I felt. Her expression changed the moment she saw the scarf. "Oh my God," she whispered quietly once she reached me. "What did she do?" I forced a small smile. "Nothing worth ruining a wedding over." Martha stared at me for several long seconds before glancing across the ballroom toward Chloe. "That girl has been humiliating you for years," she said softly. She just finally stopped hiding it. I looked away because hearing the truth out loud hurt more than I expected. Nearby, guests began taking their seats while the wedding coordinator rushed around checking table arrangements. Everything moved with polished efficiency. Expensive flowers. Candlelight. String music. Nobody looking too closely at the mother of the bride standing near the back wall, with half her hair missing beneath a silk scarf. Ryan approached a few minutes later, adjusting the cufflinks on his tuxedo nervously. He looked handsome in the careful way wealthy families expect their sons-in-law to look. Clean-cut. Controlled. Respectable. "Evelyn," he said warmly before stopping mid-sentence as he noticed the side of my head beneath the scarf. Confusion flickered across his face. "Are you feeling all right?" Chloe appeared beside him before I could answer. "She is fine," she interrupted smoothly while slipping her arm through his. "My mother just had a little beauty emergency upstairs." Her tone was playful, almost affectionate. Ryan frowned slightly. "What kind of emergency?" "Nothing dramatic," Chloe replied quickly. "You know how sensitive she gets sometimes." Sensitive. The words settled heavily between us. I watched Ryan study my face carefully like he sensed something underneath the surface but could not quite reach it. Before he could ask anything else, Chloe leaned closer to him and laughed softly. "Honestly, if my mother does not become the center of attention for at least one moment today, the universe might collapse." A few nearby bridesmaids laughed automatically. Ryan did not. That surprised me. Chloe noticed it too because her smile tightened almost imperceptibly before she guided him toward another table. "I will find you after the ceremony," she called over her shoulder. Try not to disappear on me. I stood there quietly while guests continued arriving around me. Somewhere behind the ballroom doors, I heard the wedding quartet begin rehearsing the processional music. The familiar melody drifted through the hotel hallway like something peaceful and untouched. I remembered Chloe at 7 years old dancing barefoot in our kitchen while standing on top of my feet because she wanted to learn ballroom dancing before her elementary school recital. Back then, she used to wrap her tiny arms around my waist and say, "Promise you will always stay close to me, Mom." I had kept that promise, even after my divorce, even during chemotherapy, even after years of slowly realizing my daughter only seemed to need me when she required money, reassurance, or someone to blame. I stayed. Mothers always stay longer than they should. Across the ballroom, Chloe threw her head back laughing while photographers circled her like she was royalty. The guests smiled. The music swelled louder. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath candlelight. Everything looked beautiful. But beneath all that beauty, something had already started collapsing. And for the first time in years, I was no longer afraid to let it fall. The ceremony began exactly at 4 o'clock beneath a ceiling of hanging white orchids and warm candlelight that made the entire ballroom glow gold. Guests rose quietly from their seats as the quartet started playing Canon in D. Every face turned toward the entrance where Chloe stood holding her bouquet of ivory roses against the front of her dress. She looked beautiful. That was the painful part. Cruel people rarely look cruel when the world is celebrating them. Ryan smiled the moment he saw her. Real happiness crossed his face then, open and unguarded in a way that made me unexpectedly sad for him. I wondered if he truly knew the woman he was marrying. I wondered if I ever had. Chloe walked slowly down the aisle while cameras flashed around her. Several guests dabbed tears from their eyes. Someone whispered that it felt like a fairy tale wedding. I sat near the front beside Martha with my hands folded tightly in my lap beneath the program booklet. Every few seconds, I became aware of the scarf around my head again. The fabric suddenly felt heavier under the ballroom lights. Too warm. Too noticeable. I could feel people glancing toward it, even when they tried not to. During the vows, Chloe kept her voice soft and emotional, speaking about loyalty, kindness, and unconditional love. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I stared quietly at the candle beside the altar while memories drifted through my mind like fragments of another life. Chloe at age 6 bringing me dandelions from the backyard because she thought every flower should belong to mothers. Chloe at 12 crying into my shoulder. After girls at school mocked her thrift store clothes because I could not afford designer brands back then. Chloe at 16 begging me not to work double shifts at the diner anymore because she hated seeing me come home exhausted every night. Somewhere between those years and this ballroom, something inside my daughter had changed shape completely. Maybe success changed her. Maybe social media did. Maybe I simply ignored the signs because admitting the truth would have broken my heart sooner. After the ceremony ended, guests flooded into the reception area while staff reset the ballroom for dinner service. Martha stayed close beside me as people approached offering polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. "You holding up all right?" she asked quietly once we reached the cocktail lounge. "I am still standing," I answered. "That counts for something." Martha hesitated before lowering her voice further. "Evelyn, there is something you need to know." I looked at her carefully. "What is it?" She glanced around to make sure nobody stood nearby. One of the bridesmaids showed me part of the video upstairs. My stomach tightened slightly, though I kept my face calm. Martha continued carefully. "Chloe planned the whole thing days ago. They were calling it a bridal suite prank." The words landed softly but heavily. "A prank," I repeated quietly. Martha nodded with visible disgust. Apparently, Chloe thought posting it after the honeymoon would make her go viral online. One of the girls said they already edited clips together with music. For several seconds, I said nothing. Nearby, waiters carried trays of crab cakes and champagne through the crowd, while guests laughed beneath strings of golden lights. Everything around me continued moving normally, while something inside my chest slowly hollowed out. Viral. That was the word echoing in my mind. Not private humiliation. Not family cruelty hidden behind closed doors. Entertainment. Content. My pain reduced to something strangers would replay while scrolling through their phones late at night. "She knew," I whispered finally. Martha frowned. "Knew what?" I touched the edge of my scarf gently. "About the chemotherapy." About what losing my hair did to me. Martha's expression crumpled immediately. Oh, Evelyn. 20 years earlier, doctors told me I had aggressive breast cancer shortly before Chloe started high school. I still remembered sitting in the oncology office staring at pamphlets I could barely read because my hands would not stop shaking. I remembered the first morning I woke up and found silver strands covering my pillowcase. I remembered locking myself in the bathroom because I did not want Chloe hearing me cry. But she heard anyway. She always heard. One afternoon, after another exhausting treatment session, Chloe shaved the remaining patches of my hair herself while we sat together on our back porch wrapped in blankets. She cried harder than I did that day. "You are still my beautiful mom," she kept whispering while brushing tears from her cheeks with trembling hands. That memory had carried me through some of the darkest nights of my life. And now suddenly, standing inside a luxury hotel ballroom watching guests celebrate around us, I realized my daughter had not forgotten those moments at all. She had simply transformed them into weapons. Across the room, Chloe laughed loudly beside her bridesmaids while photographers surrounded her again. One of the girls lifted her phone toward Chloe, showing her something on the screen. Chloe smirked immediately before covering her mouth with one manicured hand. Even from a distance, I knew they were watching the video. Martha touched my arm carefully. "You do not deserve this." I looked toward my daughter for a long moment before answering quietly. "No, but I tolerated it for far too long." Somewhere deep inside me, beneath the humiliation and grief and disappointment, something else had started forming. Not revenge exactly. Clarity. The kind that arrives when love finally stops blinding you to cruelty. And for the first time since entering that bridal suite, I no longer felt like the weakest person in the room. The reception officially began just after sunset when the ballroom lights dimmed and the wedding planner invited everyone to find their seats for dinner. By then, the city skyline outside the tall glass windows had turned deep blue, reflecting against the polished dance floor beneath the chandeliers. The room looked elegant in the way expensive celebrations always do. White roses floated in crystal bowls. Candlelight flickered softly against gold-trimmed plates. Waiters poured wine while a jazz trio played near the stage. Everything appeared carefully controlled. But tension has a way of moving beneath beautiful surfaces like cracks spreading under ice. I sat quietly at table 6 beside Martha while guests laughed around us. Every few minutes, someone glanced toward my scarf before quickly pretending they had not. Across the ballroom, Chloe moved from table to table greeting guests with effortless charm. She kissed cheeks, held hands, smiled for photographs. Nobody looking at her would have guessed she spent part of her wedding afternoon humiliating her own mother for entertainment. "She is watching you," Martha murmured softly beside me. I looked up and realized Chloe had paused near the dance floor staring directly toward our table. The smile remained on her face, but her eyes looked sharper now. Measuring. Nervous, maybe. Good. Let her feel uncomfortable for once. A waiter placed salads in front of us, while conversations rose louder around the room. Somewhere behind me, I overheard 2 women whispering quietly. "Did you hear something happened upstairs earlier?" one asked. "Apparently there was some kind of family drama," the other replied. Family drama. Such small words for betrayal. I picked up my water glass carefully and noticed my hands no longer trembled. Earlier that afternoon, I thought humiliation would destroy me. Now I understood something else entirely. Humiliation only works when the victim still values the opinion of the people causing it. And for the first time in years, I no longer needed Chloe's approval to feel whole. During dinner service, Ryan approached our table alone. His expression looked tense beneath the polite smile he wore for guests. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "may I sit for a moment?" Martha immediately excused herself, sensing the conversation mattered. Ryan lowered himself into the empty chair beside me and loosened his tie slightly like. He suddenly could not breathe properly inside the ballroom anymore. "I need to ask you something honestly," he said after a long pause. I folded my napkin carefully in my lap. "All right." He glanced toward Chloe across the room before lowering his voice further. "Did something happen before the ceremony?" For several seconds, I simply looked at him. Not because I did not know how to answer. Because I was deciding whether protecting Chloe still mattered more to me than protecting the truth. Mothers spend decades covering for their children, excusing behavior, softening consequences, calling cruelty stress, calling selfishness insecurity. But sitting there beneath warm candlelight while strangers celebrated around us, I suddenly felt exhausted by my own silence. Yes, I answered calmly. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. Was it because of your scarf? I nodded once. He looked down at the tablecloth for a moment before speaking again. One of the groomsmen showed me part of a video. There it was. The truth finally moving beyond the bridal suite walls. I did not understand what I was seeing, he admitted quietly. At first I thought maybe everyone was joking around. But then, he stopped speaking. Probably because he did not know how to describe watching a bride laugh while shaving her mother's hair before the ceremony. Some things sound monstrous once spoken aloud. She told people I was being dramatic, I said softly. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Evelyn, I swear to you, I did not know about any of this. I believe you. And strangely enough, I did. Ryan had always treated me kindly during the 6 years he dated Chloe. Distant sometimes, but respectful. The problem was not that he was cruel. The problem was that he loved someone capable of being cruel without remorse. Across the ballroom, Chloe noticed Ryan sitting beside me. Her expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared first. Then came irritation. Then fear. Real fear. She crossed the ballroom quickly, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. There you are, she said brightly once she reached us, though tension stretched tightly beneath her voice. People are looking for you, babe. Ryan stood slowly. We need to talk later. Chloe laughed softly. About what? He glanced at me before answering carefully. About the video. For the first time all evening, Chloe lost control of her expression completely. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it clearly. Panic. She recovered quickly, forcing another smile while touching his arm. It was just a joke, she said lightly. Mom is fine. Ryan looked directly at her. Does she look fine to you? Silence settled heavily between them. Nearby guests pretended not to listen while absolutely listening. Chloe's eyes flicked toward me, cold and warning. The same look she used as a teenager whenever she feared consequences more than guilt. You are seriously doing this right now? She whispered toward me through clenched teeth. I met her stare calmly. No, Chloe, I answered softly. You already did this. She stepped back slightly, like the words struck harder than she expected. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away toward the bridal party with rigid shoulders and trembling hands. Ryan remained standing beside the table, watching her disappear into the crowd. I think I made a terrible mistake, he said quietly. I looked down at the untouched wedding cake, placed near the dance floor beneath layers of white frosting and sugar roses. Beautiful on the outside, hollow underneath. No, I replied after a long pause. I think you are only beginning to understand the truth. After that conversation, the atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted in ways subtle enough that most guests probably could not explain it, but strong enough that everyone could feel it. The laughter sounded thinner now. Conversation stopped abruptly whenever Chloe walked past. Even the jazz trio near the dance floor seemed quieter somehow, like the music itself understood something uncomfortable had entered the room. Chloe spent the next half hour moving rapidly between guests with a smile stretched too tightly across her face. She laughed too loudly, hugged people too quickly, drank champagne faster than before. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward me, sitting calmly at table 6 beside Martha. I realized then that my silence frightened her more than anger ever could. Angry people can be dismissed as emotional. Calm people are dangerous because they have already stopped reacting and started deciding. Dinner plates were cleared shortly before 8 o'clock, while hotel staff rolled out the massive 5-tier wedding cake beneath soft golden spotlights. Guests gathered closer to the dance floor, holding phones ready for photos. Chloe stood beside Ryan with one hand wrapped around his arm, but something between them looked different now. Colder. Ryan smiled when cameras pointed toward him, but the warmth from earlier had disappeared completely. I noticed he barely touched Chloe anymore unless photographers instructed him to. A wedding photographer adjusted his lens while directing the couple toward the cake table. Perfect, he called out cheerfully. Now look at each other like you are madly in love. Chloe laughed for the cameras immediately. Ryan hesitated half a second too long. Most people missed it. I did not. Martha leaned toward me quietly. He knows something is wrong. I kept my eyes on the dance floor. Yes, I answered softly. And Chloe knows he knows. The cake cutting began beneath applause and flashing cameras. Chloe fed Ryan a bite carefully while guests clapped and laughed. Then Ryan offered her a piece in return, but his smile looked distracted, distant. Across the ballroom, I noticed two bridesmaids whispering nervously over one of their phones. One suddenly looked toward me with visible guilt before lowering the screen quickly. A few seconds later, another guest checked their own phone and frowned. Then another. The movement spread gradually through the ballroom like a cold draft nobody could locate. Chloe noticed it too. Her posture stiffened immediately. She stepped away from the cake table and crossed toward the bridesmaids with sharp, controlled movements, still smiling for appearances. "What is going on?" she hissed quietly once she reached them. I could not hear the full conversation from across the room, but I saw panic bloom across Chloe's face almost instantly. One bridesmaid looked close to tears. Another kept shaking her head while explaining something. Ryan walked over moments later. "What happened?" he asked. Chloe grabbed his wrist immediately. "Nothing. Someone uploaded a private video by accident." Accident. Interesting choice of words. Ryan held out his hand. "Let me see it." "Ryan, it is not important." "Let me see it, Chloe." The room around them continued buzzing with uneasy conversations while guests pretended not to stare. Finally, one of the bridesmaids handed Ryan the phone. He watched silently for several long seconds. No expression, no movement, just silence. Then he slowly lowered the phone and looked at Chloe in a way I had never seen before. Not confusion anymore. Understanding. Complete and devastating understanding. "You filmed this?" he asked quietly. "It was a joke," Chloe replied immediately. Everyone was laughing. Ryan's voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. "Your mother was not laughing." Chloe folded her arms tightly. "You are seriously overreacting right now." Ryan stared at her for another long moment before asking the question that finally shattered whatever remained between them. "Did you know she lost her hair during chemotherapy?" The silence that followed felt enormous. Chloe's expression flickered again. Briefly. Enough. Ryan saw it immediately. So did several guests standing nearby. "Oh my God," one woman whispered softly under her breath. Chloe became defensive instantly. That was 20 years ago. She acts like surviving cancer made her some kind of untouchable saint forever. The words landed heavily across the ballroom. I watched people physically recoil from her. Not dramatically, just small movements. A step backward, eyes widening, smiles disappearing. Sometimes public opinion changes slowly. Sometimes it turns in a single sentence. Ryan looked at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. "You humiliated your own mother on our wedding day for social media content." Chloe's face flushed bright red. "Why is everybody acting like she is the victim?" she snapped suddenly, loud enough that nearby tables fell silent. "Do you know what it is like growing up with someone who constantly needs emotional attention? Everything always becomes about her." I stood up slowly from my chair then. The ballroom quieted almost immediately. Hundreds of candle flames flickered softly across crystal glassware, while every eye turned toward me. Chloe stared back with anger trembling beneath her composure. For a moment, she looked less like a bride and more like a frightened child lashing out because the world finally stopped agreeing with her version of reality. I adjusted the silk scarf gently against my head before speaking in the calmest voice I could manage. "No, Chloe," I said softly. "Everything became about you a very long time ago. I was just too afraid to admit it." For several seconds after I spoke, nobody in the ballroom moved. The music had already stopped somewhere behind us, though I could not remember exactly when. All I could hear was the soft crackling of candle flames and the faint hum of the city traffic 30 floors below the hotel windows. Chloe stared at me with disbelief spreading slowly across her face, like she genuinely could not understand why the room was no longer standing behind her. That was the thing about people who spend years controlling the emotional temperature around them. The moment others stop reacting the way they expect, panic begins creeping in beneath the surface. "Mom," she said finally, her voice tight with warning. "Do not do this." I looked at her quietly across the ballroom. "Do what?" "Embarrass me in front of everyone." A strange sound escaped Martha beside me then. Not quite laughter, more disbelief than anything else. Around us, guests exchanged uncomfortable glances while pretending not to listen. Ryan remained motionless near the cake table, his expression pale and exhausted. He looked like a man watching his future collapse in real time. Chloe stepped closer toward me, lowering her voice sharply. "You are turning my wedding into some kind of public pity party." I noticed several guests visibly recoil at the words. Good. Let them hear her clearly now. Let everyone finally hear the things I spent years excusing in private. No, Chloe, I answered softly. I spent years protecting you from consequences. Tonight is simply the first time I stopped. Her eyes flashed immediately. You always do this. You make yourself sound innocent while everybody else becomes the villain. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. I paid for your college tuition after your father left us. I paid for your first apartment when you lost your marketing job at 26. I paid for the down payment on the house you and Ryan live in now. The room remained silent. Completely silent. I continued anyway. I spent 14 months driving you to therapy appointments after your anxiety diagnosis because you were afraid to drive alone on highways. I answered phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning when your relationships fell apart. I emptied part of my retirement savings so you could have this wedding exactly the way you wanted. Chloe crossed her arms tightly. Nobody asked you to do all that. The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could have. I nodded slowly because deep down, she was right. Nobody asked me. Mothers volunteer pieces of themselves willingly, believing love and sacrifice are the same thing. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they become permission for people to take without gratitude forever. You are correct, I said quietly. You did not ask. I chose to give because I loved you. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. Here we go again. Ryan looked at her sharply. Stop. She turned toward him instantly. Why are you acting like I committed some horrible crime? Ryan stared at her in complete disbelief. Because you humiliated your mother for internet attention. It was supposed to be funny. To who, he asked. Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it again when nobody answered for her. The silence surrounding her now felt entirely different than earlier. Before, people stayed quiet because they were uncomfortable. Now they stayed quiet because they were judging her. Human beings can sense when cruelty stops being defensible. Across the ballroom, one elderly woman slowly removed her napkin from her lap and stood from her table. Then another guest followed. Then another. One by one, several people quietly walked away from the dance floor area altogether. Not dramatically. No speeches. No confrontation. Just distance. Social rejection often arrives softly at first. I watched Chloe notice it too. Her confidence began cracking visibly around the edges. This is insane, she whispered while looking around the room. Everybody is overreacting. Martha stood beside me then, her voice calm but firm. No, sweetheart. People are finally reacting correctly. Chloe looked like she had been slapped by the sentence. Ryan rubbed one hand over his face slowly before turning toward me. Evelyn, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I shook my head gently. You did not do this. I still should have seen her more clearly. His voice sounded tired now. Defeated. Chloe stared at him in complete disbelief. You cannot seriously be taking her side right now. Ryan looked directly at her. There are no sides here, Chloe. There is just right and wrong. Something cold passed across her face then. Anger replacing panic completely. Fine, she snapped suddenly. If everybody wants to act like I am such a terrible person, maybe we should all stop pretending Mom is some fragile victim. She pointed directly toward the scarf around my head. She survived cancer 20 years ago. 20 years. But somehow we still have to revolve around her trauma forever. Several guests gasped quietly. Ryan looked horrified. Even the hotel staff standing near the ballroom doors froze completely still. Chloe's breathing had become uneven now, like years of resentment were spilling out faster than she could control them. Do you know what it was like growing up with everybody treating her like some inspirational saint? She continued bitterly. Everything was always about how brave Mom was, how strong Mom was. Nobody noticed anybody else. I listened quietly while she unraveled herself in front of hundreds of witnesses. The tragedy was not that Chloe hated me. The tragedy was realizing she truly believed kindness shown to me somehow stole love away from her. I never wanted worship, I said softly once she finally stopped speaking. I only wanted a daughter who did not mistake compassion for competition. Chloe looked away first. Not me. Her mascara had started smudging slightly beneath her eyes now. The perfect bride was disappearing inch by inch under the weight of her own words. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized I no longer felt the need to save her from herself. The ballroom never fully recovered after Chloe's outburst. People still sat at their tables. The candles still flickered softly against crystal glasses. The wedding planner even attempted to restart the music at one point, but But the atmosphere had changed too completely for anyone to pretend this was still a celebration untouched by truth. Conversations remained low and strained now, filled with careful glances and unfinished sentences. Guests checked their phones more openly. A few quietly gathered their coats near the ballroom entrance. Others avoided eye contact with Chloe altogether whenever she passed by. Public humiliation spreads quickly when witnesses realize they are watching something real instead of polished performance. Chloe stood near the dance floor gripping a champagne glass tightly, while two bridesmaids whispered beside her. One of them looked deeply uncomfortable now, like regret had finally reached her after the excitement faded. The other kept staring at her phone with growing panic. Ryan had moved to the far side of the ballroom, near the windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. He stood alone with both hands in his pockets, staring out at the city lights below. He looked like a man trying to calculate how many warning signs he ignored before tonight. Martha touched my arm gently. "You should sit down," she whispered. "You look exhausted." She was right. My body felt heavy now that the shock had faded. The scarf around my head itched beneath the warm ballroom lights, and my feet ached from standing in heels for hours. But beneath the physical exhaustion, something else had settled inside me. Peace. Strange, quiet peace. Not because my daughter had changed. She had not. But because I finally stopped trying to rewrite reality into something easier to survive. A hotel employee approached nervously carrying a silver tray. "Mrs. Parker," he said quietly, "someone asked me to give this to you." On the tray sat a folded ivory napkin with my name written across it in neat handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short message. "I am so sorry for what happened to you tonight. No mother deserves that." The note was unsigned. A few moments later, another arrived. Then another. Quiet little messages passed discreetly from table to table through waiters and guests who no longer knew how to confront me directly. Some simply said they were sorry. Others shared memories about their own mothers. One elderly man wrote, "Your dignity is the only graceful thing left in this ballroom tonight." I folded each note carefully into my purse without saying much. Across the room, Chloe noticed the exchange happening around me. I watched her expression darken further every time another guest approached my table instead of hers. She had spent years believing admiration was the same thing as love. Tonight she was learning how quickly admiration disappears once cruelty becomes visible. Suddenly, one of the large projector screens near the dance floor flickered unexpectedly. At first, most guests assumed the slideshow was restarting. Earlier in the evening, it had displayed childhood photos of Chloe and Ryan smiling beside beaches, graduation ceremonies, and holiday dinners. But this time, the screen remained black for several long seconds before a video began playing silently above the ballroom. I recognized the bridal suite immediately. The white chairs, the vanity mirrors, the champagne bottles scattered across the counters. Then came the sound. Chloe's voice filled the ballroom speakers clearly enough that several guests gasped aloud. "Hold still," she laughed on the recording. "This is going to be hilarious online." The room froze instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. On screen, silver strands of my hair drifted slowly onto my lap, while bridesmaids laughed nervously around me. One phone camera zoomed closer toward my face. Then Chloe's voice came again. "At least now she will stop trying to compete with me in photos." The clip continued for only another 20 seconds before hotel staff abruptly shut the projector off, but the damage was already done. Complete silence spread across the ballroom afterward. Heavy, suffocating silence. Chloe looked absolutely horrified. "Who did that?" she shouted suddenly, spinning toward the bridal party. "Who uploaded the full version?" One bridesmaid immediately burst into tears. "I did not mean for everybody to see it," she whispered shakily. "I only sent it to one person." Chloe's face twisted with fury. "You ruined my wedding." The irony nearly took my breath away. Ryan walked slowly back toward the center of the ballroom then. Every guest watched him. Chloe stepped toward him desperately. "Ryan, please. This is being blown way out of proportion." He looked at her for a very long moment before answering quietly. "You filmed yourself humiliating your own mother. It was supposed to be private." Ryan blinked slowly like he could not believe the sentence he just heard. "That is your defense." Chloe's breathing became uneven again. "Everybody is turning against me because she made herself look pathetic." That was the moment something inside Ryan finally broke completely. I saw it happen in his face. The exact second love collapsed under the weight of clarity. No, he said softly. They turned against you because you enjoyed hurting someone who loved you. Chloe stared at him in stunned silence. Around the ballroom, guests looked away awkwardly while others watched openly now, no longer pretending this was ordinary wedding drama. It was something deeper than that. A public unveiling. The slow collapse of an illusion everyone had helped maintain for too long. Ryan removed his wedding ring carefully, then placed it on the cake table beside the untouched slices of white frosting and sugar roses. Several people gasped quietly. Chloe looked like all the air had vanished from the room. You cannot be serious, she whispered. Ryan's eyes never left hers. I do not know who you became, he said quietly, but I know I cannot marry someone who treats kindness like weakness. Then he walked away from the dance floor while the entire ballroom watched in silence. And for the first time all night, Chloe looked truly alone. After Ryan walked away from the dance floor, the ballroom remained frozen in a silence so complete that even the hotel staff seemed unsure whether they should continue serving drinks. Chloe stood alone beside the towering wedding cake with mascara streaked faintly beneath her eyes and her hands trembling against the satin fabric of her dress. A few guests quietly gathered their belongings and slipped toward the exits without saying goodbye. Others stayed seated, watching cautiously like witnesses at the end of a trial nobody expected to attend. The chandeliers still glowed warmly overhead. The flowers still smelled sweet. But the illusion was gone now. All that remained was truth standing naked in the middle of a luxury ballroom. Chloe suddenly turned toward me with desperation, replacing anger for the first time all evening. Mom, she said sharply, her voice cracking slightly. Say something. I looked at her calmly across the room. I already have. No, she snapped, stepping closer. Fix this. The words settled heavily between us. Fix this. As though repairing the destruction she created was still somehow my responsibility. As though motherhood meant endless cleanup after emotional disasters caused by the people you loved most. I noticed several guests watching me carefully then, waiting to see whether I would step back into the familiar role Chloe spent years assigning me. The forgiving mother. The quiet protector. The woman who absorbed humiliation privately so everyone else could stay comfortable publicly. But something fundamental inside me had changed that night in the bridal suite while silver strands of hair fell silently into my lap. I cannot fix what I did not break, I answered softly. Chloe stared at me like she genuinely did not understand the sentence. Ryan had disappeared completely by then. One of the groomsmen quietly informed the wedding planner that he had left the hotel through the west entrance 20 minutes earlier. Chloe overheard it and nearly collapsed into one of the reception chairs. He would not actually leave me, she whispered shakily. Nobody answered her. Not the bridesmaids. Not the guests. Not even Martha. Because everyone in the room understood something Chloe still refused to accept. Ryan had not abandoned her over one cruel joke. He walked away because tonight revealed who she truly was when empathy no longer benefited her. A tall man in a charcoal suit entered the ballroom shortly afterward carrying a leather portfolio beneath one arm. I recognized him immediately. Daniel Mercer. My attorney. Chloe noticed him too and frowned in confusion. Why is your lawyer here? She asked. I reached slowly into my purse and removed my reading glasses before answering. Because I made a phone call during dinner. A ripple of unease moved visibly through the remaining guests. Daniel approached respectfully and handed me several documents without speaking loudly enough for others to hear. I skimmed the pages carefully while Chloe watched with growing alarm. Mom, she said more quietly now. What is going on? I folded the papers calmly. The honeymoon villa reservation in Santorini was purchased through my trust account. Chloe blinked rapidly. What does that have to do with anything? I canceled it. The color drained from her face instantly. Around us, several guests exchanged shocked glances. You cannot do that, she whispered. It is already paid for. Not anymore. Her breathing became uneven again. Mom, are you serious right now? I looked at her steadily. Completely. Daniel handed me another folder. The mortgage assistance agreement for your home has also been terminated effective immediately, I continued softly. Going forward, all financial obligations connected to that property belong entirely to you. Chloe stared at me in complete disbelief. You are punishing me. The accusation sounded almost childlike. I shook my head gently. No, Chloe. I am finally allowing you to live with the consequences of your own choices." Her eyes filled with tears immediately then, but even now something about them felt more frightened than remorseful. "You are destroying my life over one mistake." I almost answered quickly, almost reminded her that humiliating someone who survived cancer by shaving their head for internet attention was not one mistake. It was a reflection of years of cruelty hidden beneath polished smiles and carefully edited family photos. But I no longer felt interested in arguing morality with someone determined not to see it. Instead, I said the simplest truth I had left. "Your life was not destroyed tonight because of me." Chloe covered her mouth suddenly as fresh tears spilled down her face. One bridesmaid stepped forward to comfort her, but Chloe pulled away sharply. Across the ballroom, guests looked deeply uncomfortable now. Not because I was cruel, because they were witnessing something rare and unsettling. A woman refusing to sacrifice her dignity any longer simply because the person hurting her shared her blood. Daniel quietly handed me one final envelope. "There is one more thing," I said softly. Chloe looked up slowly. "The remainder of the money your father left for future grandchildren has been transferred this evening into the Evelyn Parker Cancer Recovery Foundation." Her face went completely blank. "You gave it away?" "Yes." "To strangers?" I adjusted the silk scarf gently around my head before answering. "No, to women who understand what survival actually costs." For several seconds, Chloe could only stare at me while candlelight flickered across the ruined remains of her wedding reception. Then finally, for the first time all night, her anger cracked completely apart and something else appeared underneath it. Fear. Real fear. Not fear of losing money. Not fear of public embarrassment. Fear of realizing the person she spent years taking for granted had finally stopped staying. 6 months after the wedding, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one quiet Sunday morning brushing short silver hair away from my forehead, while soft rain tapped gently against the windows of my condo overlooking Lake Michigan. The strands had grown back, uneven at first, curling slightly around my ears in ways they never used to before chemotherapy or before Chloe's bridal suite humiliation. But now I found myself strangely grateful for the change. The woman staring back at me no longer looked like someone desperately trying to hold a broken family together with silence and sacrifice. She looked tired sometimes. Older, certainly, but peaceful in a way I had not felt for years. I tied a cream-colored scarf loosely around my neck and headed toward the kitchen where coffee brewed softly. Beside the morning newspaper, sunlight filtered through the rain clouds just enough to brighten the small dining area, filled with plants Martha insisted I needed after moving into the condo. "Living things help people heal," she liked to say every time she brought another fern through my front door. Maybe she was right. The apartment smelled like coffee and lavender now instead of tension. No slammed doors. No anxious late-night phone calls. No carefully chosen words designed to avoid upsetting someone who treated kindness like weakness. Just quiet. Honest quiet. After the wedding disaster spread online, the video disappeared from social media within 48 hours, but not before thousands of strangers saw it. Some recognized Chloe from her marketing company's public campaigns. Others simply reacted with shock that anyone could treat their mother that way. Chloe tried posting statements afterward claiming the clip had been misunderstood and taken out of context, but the damage was already done. Her company quietly placed her on leave 3 weeks later. Ryan officially ended the marriage before they even returned the wedding gifts. Last I heard, he moved to Seattle for work and rarely spoke publicly about what happened. I respected him for that. Some people understand that dignity includes refusing to turn private heartbreak into performance. Chloe contacted me many times during those first few months. At first, the messages came angry and defensive. "You ruined my life. I hope you are happy now." Then came blame. "Ryan overreacted. Everybody turned against me because you made yourself look fragile." Eventually, though, the tone changed. Shorter messages. Quieter ones. "I am sorry. Can we talk? I miss you." I never answered immediately. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Healing requires distance from people who only apologize once consequences arrive. Around 10 o'clock that morning, my phone buzzed softly against the kitchen counter. Chloe's name appeared on the screen again. I stared at it for several seconds before opening the message. "Mom, I know you probably hate me, but I need you to know I finally started therapy again. Real therapy this time. Not for appearances. I think something inside me broke a long time ago, and I kept blaming everybody else for it. I read the message twice before setting the phone down beside my coffee cup. Outside the window, rainwater slid slowly down the glass, while traffic moved quietly below. A year ago, that message would have sent me rushing back toward forgiveness before accountability had time to settle properly. But age teaches difficult lessons eventually. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Compassion without self-respect becomes self-destruction. I picked up my coffee and walked toward the bookshelf near the living room window where framed photographs sat beneath warm morning light. One picture showed me and Chloe years earlier during my final chemotherapy treatment. My head completely bald beneath a knitted cap, while 14-year-old Chloe smiled beside me holding a sign that read, "Mom beat cancer." I studied her young face carefully. She looked sincere in that photograph. Loving, even. That was the complicated truth people rarely discuss. Cruel adults are not always cruel children. Sometimes unresolved resentment grows quietly over decades until entitlement hardens around it like concrete. Martha arrived shortly before noon, carrying blueberry muffins from the bakery downstairs. "You look lighter today," she observed after setting the paper bag on my kitchen counter. I smiled faintly. I think I finally stopped mourning the version of Chloe I kept inventing in my head. Martha nodded slowly like she understood exactly what I meant. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Evelyn Parker Cancer Recovery Foundation downtown, where volunteers prepared welcome baskets for women beginning chemotherapy treatments that week. Scarves, journals, tea packets, soft blankets. Small things, really. But during illness, small kindnesses feel enormous. One woman around my age approached me quietly while choosing a scarf from the donation table. "I heard this foundation was started by someone who survived cancer twice," she said gently. I smiled. Something like that. She touched the edge of her own thinning hair self-consciously. "I am terrified of losing it." For a moment, I remembered the bridal suite again, the buzzing razor, Chloe's laughter, hair falling silently into my lap while strangers recorded my humiliation for entertainment. But strangely, the memory no longer hurt the same way. Time had transformed it into something else. A dividing line. The moment I stopped begging people to love me correctly and finally started protecting the parts of myself they were willing to destroy. I handed the woman a pale blue silk scarf from the table. "Hair grows back," I told her softly. "What matters is making sure your dignity does too." That evening, after returning home, I found another message from Chloe waiting on my phone. This one was shorter than the others. No excuses, no demands, just a single sentence. "I'm starting to understand what I did to you." I stared at the screen for a long time before finally placing the phone face down on the kitchen table beside the fading evening light. Maybe one day I would answer her. Maybe not. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing, no matter how badly people confuse them. Some wounds heal. Others simply teach you where never to stand again. And as rain continued falling softly beyond the windows of my quiet little condo, I realized something unexpected. Losing my hair that night had not destroyed me. Losing the need for Chloe's approval had set me free.